We're going to get started. We do have a quorum. The first item on our agenda is approval of the minutes from the executive committee meeting of May 12th. Move approval. I have a motion and a second. And please cast your votes. I'm sorry.
Hey,
Mayor Boss.
Mr. Chairman, I'm here representing Jerry Jones today.
Yes.
Should I be voting?
Yes.
Okay, so should I go sit over
You
there?
can do it from there. We can.
Well, he's got to have his little.
Oh, the clicker.
Yeah, clicker.
Hand him the clicker.
Yeah, I don't feel high tech if I don't have my Star Wars clicker.
You don't look high tech either.
I know. Is that Santee way?
It's easy to say I don't get a vote.
Okay. Voting is closed and that's approved. Next thing is public communications. Do you have any requests?
We have one.
Let me go to public comments first.
Yeah, no worries.
Catherine?
And what I wanted to mention was the new survey that came out, I believe it was yesterday, commissioned by Mike McConnell for the homeless, where they said a tax increase, I forgot how much it was, but I think it was like 70% of people would do a tax increase for homeless. And prior, when you guys put forward Proposition A, you specifically said that you somehow it's not in your purview to allow money or tax increase to go to homeless when it's already an allowable use for you to do. So what I would recommend, and specifically for you, is to bring forward a half-cent tax increase. If you're going to do that one ballot in November of this year, to bring forward to Sandy that you guys actually do a half-cent tax increase for housing, homeless, and any project that would reduce greenhouse gases. Keep it nice and simple. Tons of money for you guys to do, and we could get a funding stream for the homeless. And so you have the votes to do that, so think about it. And the other thing I was going to mention was the city of Santee, how they changed their transit occupancy tax to include online travel agencies as hotel operators. They quadrupled their transit occupancy tax revenue coming in, and nobody but Santee in this county has even looked into the issue. So I'm going to ask again that Sandy staff look into that wonderful issue and actually talk to the gentleman. Thanks.
Thank you, Catherine. That's the only request for public comment.
Some of you, I think all of you have gotten the letter that I'm asking you to sign on water quality, and it's follow-up on the fact that 5 members of our congressional delegation, all of them, great, which is really great, signed on to a letter to the EPA asking for additional funding for water quality measures. Thanks, Bill, for signing on, and one of your constituents, Vito Roccaforte, grew up surfing with my kids, so love the Roccaforte family. Sam, like I told you, my best friend, Robert, his family lives in Escondido. My neighbor, John, Mike Hastings, grew up in Santee. And Steve, the Schumacher family, one of their kids actually almost died surfing in polluted water in IB. So we're all connected here. Most of you have signed on. I'm going to be badgering some of you. Mary and Richard Bailey and obviously Ron have been on this from the very beginning. Really appreciate it. But it's really important to show regional support. And really the foundation of all this comes out of the Borders Committee, where I have, thanks to John's mentorship as chair, now I'm chair, that very collegial, productive partnership, one region, has really helped. County Board of Supervisors signed on letters, Coastal Commission, we've gotten everybody supporting this, so just consider it. But I really appreciate, I think I've gotten most of the mayors of San Diego, some of you are missing, but I'll track you down. So I really appreciate it.
Sign that letter. Raise your hand.
Steve and Terry, I think I need to get you guys.
Jim.
I haven't read it, yeah.
Oh, good.
I
I'll
look
give you a
forward
copy
to the
again.
badgering.
One of my best friends, Jim Flanagan, now lives in San Marcos, grew up surfing with him, now he surfs. So I can name someone from every one of your communities that I surf with, or my kids surf with, or grew up in IB and connected. So, and more importantly, your guys will be bummed if I'm sending all of my people north surfing beaches. And then you tell them you didn't sign on to the letter, so anyway. But I really appreciate it, it means a lot.
Yeah, they can surf on my beach.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I got guys from Kansas City, welcome, so anyway, really appreciate it, thanks. That's it.
Well, thank you. Just a comment, you're doing a great job of getting the public's focus on
Great,
this.
thank you. Appreciate
That's
it.
what it's going to take. There are some people that don't realize working regionally is a good thing.
Yeah,
So keep it up if there's anything we can help with.
thank you.
Okay, that completes our public comment, member comments. Our first item, item 3, is a review of the draft board agendas for the meetings of June 23rd and July 14th for the business agenda and then the policy agenda.
So item 3A is your draft board business agenda for June 23rd. Item 1 is approval of your meeting minutes, 2 is public comments, communications, member comments, and 3 is actions by your policy advisory committees. On consent, we have your standard monthly item approval of proposed solicitations and contracts. We don't have any planned solicitations, any new RFPs, but we would have some proposed contract awards in the area of on-call transportation, economic, and other modeling services. And then we'll be asking the board, Mayor, that to actually also adopt a resolution for the Section 115 pension trust. One of the check boxes we need to do to get that up and running. Item 5 is the fiscal year 2018 claims for Transportation Development Act, TDA, and State Transit Assistance, STA Assistance. It's annual claims that are done. This is going to your Transportation Committee next Friday. And this provides funding for public transit services in the region. Item 6 is your annual review of committees and working groups. You'll hear that item later today as part of this executive committee agenda, and it's going to come to the board for consideration. And then items 7 and 8 are your standard report on meetings and the board attended on behalf of San Day, and report summarizing delegated actions taken by the executive director. Under reports, we have your annual report from your independent taxpayer oversight committee, which hangs at ITAL. Stuart Coughlin, who's the current chair, will be coming to give that report. And then we have a few items, one item here related to Midcoast, and later on I'm going to talk about another item, but a hearing necessity of acquisition of property interest for the Midcoast Border Transit Project. I believe this is for PS Rose Canyon property. Item 11, this has gone to your transportation committees and then regional planning, and it will be coming back to transportation next week. It's to approve the proposed approach for conducting the 10-year review of the Transnet program. Item 12, Rose Creek Bikeway Project. It's a CMGC construction services agreement. MCTC, which is your contractor you selected that's building both Midcoast and some related projects. This is one of those projects that we envision them building as well. So guaranteed maximum price has been negotiated. Will be considered by the Transportation Committee next week, and then pending their recommendation would come to the board. Item 13 is a budget amendment for North County Transit District. We've been doing some projects at their request to replace some of their bus and train wash facilities. So this one, because of the dollar amount, will be going to Transportation Committee, but the board will need to act on this one. And then item 14 is another work product for your regional plan, and it's to bring the draft public involvement plan for that, for feedback and discussion by the board. And then we propose to add actually another item that's not on the agenda, also dealing with Midcoast. We've been working with La Jolla Country Day School with regard to the widening work we need to do on Genesee, and we'd like to bring a proposed settlement for discussion by the board and possible action by the board. So if there's any other questions, I'll move on. Okay, so item 3B is your draft board policy agenda for July 14th. Item 1 is your standard public comments, communications, member comments. And this one, we have a couple closed sessions, and then we have an item we'd like to bring, the San Diego Regional Autonomous Proving Ground. Mayor Salas introduced this item at our joint meeting of the Transportation and Regional Planning Committees last week. We'd like to bring this item. It has right now only staff's name initially, but what we intend to do is work with some of the private sector partners, and we'd like to fill this out and kind of be a form of panel discussion of what's been going on and with regard to this and how the partnerships are sort of shaping up. So we have that one for information, and then, as I mentioned, 2 closed sessions with regard to the Midcoast Corridor Transit Project, and then the Midcoast the large one, we're gonna double check project. So with that, we ask for your approval.
Okay? Yeah. Catherine? Speaker request here.
Hi, I would like to talk about the agenda item for June 23rd. Item 9, the ITOP compliance audit. This week at the City of San Diego, June 5th, 2017, item 150 is part of their infrastructure plan. They have to say that they are finally going to follow your rule number, or your board policy 031, Rule 17, fiscal and compliance audit. Section 4, local agency balance limitation, where you can only have 30% of what your balance is in reserves by the end of the year. The City of San Diego is giving you, is going to be presenting to you guys that they met that rule when they have it. And the way you can tell that is because none of the numbers on the city reports can be matched up with any of the numbers on their comprehensive annual financial reports. And so what I would ask for you to do as part of those compliance audits is actually ask the City of San Diego to use your same form that you have for projects, CIP projects. Because currently, San Diego never has a project construction date or an end date that has to be 3 years after you put in a CIP project. There's so much money that what I see, or what they say, there's $26.4 million. They can only have 9. So what I recommend the city to do is actually come back to you for the rest of the money and see if we could use it for homeless and give it to the regional continuum of care, because the City of San Diego has no plans for the money right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that's the only request for public speakers. We have, we need an approval of the draft board agendas for the 2 dates.
Move approval.
Listed. We have a motion, Mayor Voss, and a second from Mayor Morrison. Please cast your votes. City of San Diego. Keep pressing. There you go. Okay. And that's approved unanimously, and we will move on then to our legislative status report. Robin will give us a report.
Good morning,
Freshly
everyone.
back in Northern California.
Okay. So first off, just a brief update on the state budget. As I mentioned at our last meeting, the governor had released his May revised, which included about $2.8 billion for the implementation of SB 1. The legislature has until next Thursday, June 15th, to pass the budget, and then the governor has until July 1st to sign it into law. So with that being said, the CTC has already started to initiate workshops to discuss the implementation of SB 1. Gary and I were both in Sacramento yesterday for the first day, and today is the second day of the CTC workshops. So we will, of course, continue to closely monitor all of these, and we encourage our local jurisdictions to be involved in those. There's at least 5 to 7 new competitive programs for all of us to be involved in, so there's a lot of exciting opportunities, and they're planning to move pretty quickly. Secretary Kelly mentioned that one of his top priorities yesterday is to get awards out within the next year or so. So we would expect quite a few calls for projects to start being released by the end of this year, probably. A particular note to SANDAG is the California Freight Investment Program. This is something that we discussed briefly at our last meeting as well. Originally, the California Freight Investment Program was developed last year to determine how to allocate some of the federal freight formula funds that were coming to California. And out of that pot, the administration has stated that a priority of theirs was to spend about $150 million to support infrastructure projects along the border between California and Mexico. So Otay-Mesa East is State Route 11. That project was, of course, a priority for the administration. The guidelines were supposed to be adopted at the end of May, but given SB 1, the CTC decided to hold off and decide how to incorporate some of the new trade corridor funding that will be made available through SB 1 into the California Freight Investment Program. So we're watching that closely to see how it's going to develop, and then that call will come out so that we can go after those funds. So unless there's any questions on SB 1, we wanted to spend some time today, again, talking about Assembly Bill 805. Yes.
I do have a question on SB 1. Do you have any news to give us relative to the initiative gathering, and
Right.
if it's gaining any legs, and if we have to worry about the revenue stream that is predicted in SB 1?
So it continues to be something that everyone is watching, and that was something that was raised yesterday as well. And Secretary Kelly's response to that question is we need to start moving as quickly as possible so that folks can see the benefits of this funding. So right now everyone knows kind of what this is going to cost me, but it's not clear what am I going to get out of this. And so the administration's response is let's get moving as quickly as possible so we can start to see some of these benefits materialize from the funding. They're moving forward as is.
So they're moving forward, but how about the opposition? Are they gaining any legs?
It's continuing to move. I don't know if I can say that it's gaining legs, but it's definitely still proceeding. Thank you.
Any other questions? We do have a public speaker. Request for public comment. Catherine?
Thank you. I think when I looked at AB 85, I'm not sure if I actually agree with your new analysis for the voting. And because I thought it said that the city and county, they're going to combine their votes together and then half them between half the city and half the county. So I'm not sure. But if it is like that, then basically nobody is going to lose any points except for the county of San Diego is going to lose 1 point total, and the city of San Diego is going to gain 2 points. Now I believe Escondido is going to gain 1 point. But nobody else is actually going to have changes to the voting structure. Specifically, right now, the city and the county are the only two people that can vote together to have that positive vote. And even after this, again, only the city and county together would be able to have that positive over 50% vote. So nothing's really actually changing with that, and I would recommend that you do that, please.
Okay, thank you.
Would you like me to provide the presentation on AB 805?
Please.
Okay. So since our last meeting, AB 805 was passed out of the Assembly. First it went through the Assembly Appropriations Committee on May 25th, and then it was passed off the Assembly floor on May 31st. It's now pending referral in the Senate. We expect it's going to go to the Senate Transportation Committee and the Senate Governance and Finance Committee. And it's going to start to move much quicker. So whereas in the Assembly we had about 5 months to see it move from introduction off of the floor, within the Senate we have about 3 months left in the legislative cycle. And so within that time, it needs to pass out of its policy committees, the two policy committees, the Appropriations Committee, off the Senate floor, and then assuming there's additional amendments, back to the Assembly for concurrence. So like I said, it's going to be very quick moving, and so with that in mind, we wanted to take some time to do a check-in with the committee today. There have been several sets of amendments made to the bill, as you know, primarily related to the transit agencies at this point, but Assemblymember Lorena Gonzalez-Fletcher has indicated that more amendments are to come. Based on the comments made at the Board of Directors meeting and this committee's meeting in April, it appears that there's 3 main areas of interest that remain with the current version of the bill. So 1, leadership, 2, the voting provisions, and 3, the auditing provisions. Given how quickly things may start to move, however, it would be helpful to have some guiding principles at this point to help the agency respond to any potential amendments, language ideas that may be presented in the coming weeks. Similar to how our legislative program works, where it serves as a roadmap for legislation introduced throughout the year, we're looking for guidance from this committee today regarding any high-level goals or values that can help structure what our ultimate goals for the bill itself may be. So if it's all right with the chair, I'll just provide a high-level overview of kind of where things stand on each of the 3 components of the bill that I mentioned first, and then we can open it up for a discussion. Starting off with leadership, as you know, currently SANDAG has the discretion to determine our own leadership. So we've come up with our nominating process. We have a nominating committee. We currently have a chair and a vice chair serving annual terms of leadership. Under AB 805, it would permanently dictate that the chair and the vice chair alternate every 4 years between the mayors of the first and the second largest cities. As far as voting goes, as you know, we currently have our dual voting system with the weighted and the tally simultaneous voting structure. Under AB 805, it would propose what we're calling a modified MTS system. So you would have your tally vote. Each agency has 1 vote per agency, but at any time, a jurisdiction could choose to call for a weighted vote instead. So if 2 jurisdictions supported going with the weighted vote would be called. And with that weighted vote, if 4 jurisdictions, which make up at least a majority of the vote, approve the motion, it would supersede the tally vote. And finally, with auditing, as we've discussed at previous meetings, SANDAG currently utilizes an independent financial auditor, as well as an internal performance auditor to complete financial and performance audits on at least an annual basis. We're also subject to audits by the California Department of Finance, FTA, and FHWA, as well as other audits. The Transnet ITOP committee, which is wholly composed of members of the public, also employs an independent financial auditor for its fiscal and compliance audits, as well as triennial performance audits. As you know, this committee actually currently oversees the auditing process for SANDAG and its 3 component units. In comparison, AB 805 would create an independent performance auditor that would serve a term of 5 years, as well as a new 5-member audit committee that would be composed of 2 SANDAG board members and 3 members of the public. We've also discussed certainly within the bill that raises questions regarding the proposed auditor's roles and responsibilities as it pertains to the agency as a whole. So with that being said, again, given the nature of the legislative process, ultimately what we'd like to achieve today is a better sense of what success looks like. What are some of the principles or the values that this committee would like to see supported in the final version of the bill? As I mentioned, the bill's going to be moving pretty quickly, and so we'd like to be able to provide some benchmarks to legislators in Sacramento that they can use to evaluate the bill as it comes before them. Meaning rather than specific language or ideas maybe, we'd like to be able to explain what are our core values. Help them see, does this potential amendment support or hurt the values that we're trying to preserve here at SANDAG? So being able to explain what success looks like without actually defining how we get there will help us to tell our story to folks throughout the state and hopefully help produce a more productive dialogue as we define what success looks like for the region as a whole. And with that, I would love to get any feedback or ideas that you all may have on some potential guiding principles.
Yeah, I just think at this point, I think it's important that what Robin was saying is that we look at principles and don't look at specifics at this point. And so if we see kind of an overall principle of what we're looking toward and not try to sit here and kind of negotiate it out among ourselves here or anything, but to give, to at least know what direction do we want to go, not what are the specifics. I think it's much more important to give latitude to the team that's working in Sacramento to say, okay, if we know something is going to be completely off base, then we know that. But if something's within the basic principles, then that gives us more room to work.
So maybe do we want to go on the 3 components or go down?
Why don't you start with the first component?
All right, so leadership.
And you're talking about the way that we currently elect or some version of the board elected. Okay, Mayor Boss?
I think your point is well taken, Ron. If there's one word that should be our overarching principle, it should be regionalism, as far as I'm concerned. That should be the byword for everything we do. With regard to how that impacts, well, let's take leadership. I believe limiting leadership to 2 cities because of their size would defeat the purpose of regionalism. And secondly, with regard to the weighted override, I think conceptually, for myself, I would say I don't have a problem with that. The challenge is the construct. And I believe if regionalism is the byword, then it has to be a regional override. For example, rather than just 4 cities, my suggestion would be at least 1 city from each sub-region would have to participate in that call for the weighted override. Absent that, I think we defeat the purpose of regionalism. So there you have it. As far as audit, conceptually, I don't have a problem with having a standing audit committee. I think it's all in how we meet the goal. But of the 3 pillars of 805 right now, that one troubles me the least.
I still think that this bill is not needed because very simple. It should be about local government, giving authority to local government. We have been working very well together. The only benefit or the only thing I support in this bill is the outside audit. That's the only thing I support. This is fine. This is really confirms our transparency as a government, and I don't have any problem with it. the vote going through the assembly, was there a single Republican vote supporting this bill?
Not that I'm aware of.
Was there some Democrat who opposed that bill?
Yes.
How many?
On the floor, it was 3, I want to say. In
That
committee, it was
just
1.
should send a message. Don't polarize our region. It's nothing but politics about this bill. And if I am Lorena Gonzalez, Assemblywoman Gonzalez, I would drop it because this is very divisive. This is not good for our region. This is not for our local government.
Let's stay focused on that. There are principles that we can articulate.
The only thing I can support is the audit.
Okay. Here, Desmond.
Thank you. I think between the three principles that you pointed out, for me in priority would be, the tally and weighted votes. I do not like the fact that the weighted votes would supersede or outweigh, the tally vote. I do like the combination of the tally vote. I think Mr. Voss has stepped towards that to where regional folks have a voice, or each region. And I think as far as the overall principle of regionalism, if that's, to me it's really voice, is making sure everybody has a voice as well. So I don't know if regional voice but it feels like, as one of the smaller cities with a smaller weighted vote, it's really going to be worth the drive to even come down here. So to vote if we don't have that. So I think between the principles, I like the first one as far as a priority is the weighted vote structure. I don't care for that. The leadership would be the next priority for me as far as going down the list. As far as we would like to choose our own leadership, I think would just be the overall voice. And then the audit is I think where everybody's okay on the audit. Nobody really has a problem with that. But for me, it's between the three principles. I like the regional voice, and then in priority, the tally vote versus the weight would be number one, and then number two, leadership, and the audit is fine.
Remember, what we're trying to do is basically give our team both here and Sacramento some general guidelines, okay? And maybe there's a way this is going to be worked out. When we started the year, I would not say, gee, we need a major overhaul to say that. There's a lot of problems in this region that need to be focused on. Not the least of which is what Catherine's been making us on Wayne, but that's a separate subject. But regionalism, that could take many forms. I'm concerned. I keep hearing the word democracy used. All due respect to Chula Vista, but the county's like, we're pretty part of the county. Dwarfs Chula Vista. And to put Chula Vista up, to tell us who our leaders are going to be, tell the county who they're going to send. This is nonsense. Okay? It's as polite as I can be. Total nonsense. There's nothing. This isn't about democracy. This is about saying we've got to take away your democracy because we're afraid we're being the authors of this. Are afraid that on our own we might get it wrong. So Sacramento's got to save us. This is not regionally. This will destroy a lot of positives. And I think for us, I'd like to see at the end of the day, however these changes are made, that there is still an incentive for people to work together regionally. And I don't think there's appreciation of that, how this board has worked. I mean, I'm in the middle of the city. I'm very close to this building, but I still have a concern of how we move people around, how we move goods around, how our economy is going to work. We can't ship everything on the trolley. It doesn't work, folks. We need roads, we need public transit, we need a whole bunch of things. And this is like an attempt to take control and create, a sub-area that somebody's personal idea. So I think that maintaining the principle of regionalism, which we have always had, the auditing, I think everybody's in agreement. We could do a better job there. And make sure that we integrate the standards and everything else. And, those things could be done. But the two parts that I think are sort of get your blood pressure up a little bit, I think, are the regionalism
especially not being able to select your own leadership team. So, for whatever it's worth, my 2 cents. Who else? Just from my point of view, the concept that I want to argue is that it's fundamentally immoral to ask parts of the county to pay for these projects with their tax dollars and not give them representation. I think that's is an important point to hit, because what this really is a silencing of groups of people that you don't like the way they think. And that's not what we do in America. In America, everybody gets a voice, and that may the best man win. But or woman. Hey, using man in the mankind sense. So that's the point I would keep pushing. This is just, it's a fundamental American principle that if you're going to be taxed, then you get a voice.
Just one question. What was the difference between the tallies vote before and now versus weighted vote? I mean, we've always had the weighted vote, is that correct? And
in our current system, you have the tally and the weighted simultaneously, and you have to pass both thresholds in order for a motion to pass. Under AB 805 as it's currently proposed, we would initially just have the tally vote required for any item, but at any point, 2 jurisdictions could call for a weighted vote instead. So it'd be 2 steps, and the weighted vote would supersede the tally vote. So it's essentially just 1 threshold versus 2, dual versus simultaneous, population versus tally.
if I can recall, that's what we did at the MTS meeting. There was a tally vote that was already in place.
Right.
And then we had a weighted vote that superseded the.
Correct. So this would basically incorporate the current MTS system here at Sanda.
Support that, okay.
I can tell you that sitting at MTS and seeing that happen, a tally vote versus a weighted vote, it was disheartening to see that, for instance, on one of our votes, there were 10 jurisdictions that voted no and 5 that voted yes. And after a weighted vote, it was overturned. And so for me to see, when I walked away, my thought was, why was I even here? Because when you have a supermajority of tally vote that can be overridden by just a few people sitting at a table, why bother? Why bother? And I'm just saying, not that it's right or wrong, just what I felt like I didn't even need to be there.
Well, we're just the 8th largest city in the nation.
Well, you may be one of the largest nations in the city,
we have more people in our city.
But it doesn't make the people that live in the city of San Diego better than the people that live in San Diego.
And that is not even an issue, better or not. That was not even an issue. It's just we have more.
I didn't say it.
Let me put some perspective. Up till this year, I've been on that board for a long time. I think there's only been one weighted vote that I can remember. It was Council Member Tom Baer. I was so damn mad at him to do it because it was pointless. And now this whole notion is fracturing us. I mean, I'm not saying who's right or wrong, but we're getting divided over things that aren't even critical to the business that's before us, whether it's at MTS improving public transit, or here doing a complete system. And I think it's costing us already. So I mean, we could argue back and forth all day. You know, I have the benefit of having sat on the city representing the city for years. And I never saw anything that was important enough to call forward until never. As I said, I only remember 28 years that happened once. I might have missed one, but that's all I can ever remember. I mean, it's stuck in my mind. Even though I agreed with his point of view, it was purposeless. So, and in any event, I think we're probably all in agreement on the auditing stuff. Mayor Morrison?
Yeah, you know, having an audit is one thing, and I think we need to realize that, you know, audit, we automatically say, oh yeah, everyone needs to have an audit. Realizing this is not a financial audit. This is a performance audit, which is entirely different. And also within the bill, it gives this auditor that we would have to hire, along with their staff. There's no funding for any of this. So this is going to be extra expenses for a whole new department. And it gives them basically investigatory authority. It gives them subpoena authority, because staff, any member would have to go before them and under oath and everything. And this is more than just an audit. We all say audits. This is something entirely different. And they can have a right to investigate anything they want to. You know, where in government do you have this kind of situation? I mean, they're arguing that in Congress right now. You know, so this is not, you know, because whenever we talk audits, everyone says you're for an audit because you want to have your books open, you want to be transparent, everything else. This is something entirely different. So just make sure when we're saying this that we understand what the difference is. This is not a financial audit.
That's a good point. Well, there are two components. One is dealing with financial audit, but then it's the audit committee and the role that it plays.
Right.
And that's a good point.
Maybe just to clarify, we can actually get, because the audit provisions are a little more, I guess, complicated. We haven't spent a lot of time talking about it. There's maybe some basic things on this. Right now, this committee, this committee acts as the audit oversight committee for your financial audit. What the bill would do is, in addition to this, create a different audit committee, which would be composed of 3 board members and then 2 public members appointed by the board to look at the performance audit and oversee the auditor. So I guess the question is, are you supportive of additional committee structure that way, or would you like to use of the existing structure? You also have your ITOC, so it's unclear on what the group, the auditor would do in addition to what the citizen committee of ITOC does, because they do performance audits and they do fiscal compliance audits.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that I know I've talked over with the author on this, is because her deal was she wanted to involve the public. And so I mentioned there is the ITOC, which is all public, has no board members. And, you know, why not just incorporate that instead of creating another layer of governance and another expense, use the ITOC. And, you know, I'm not too sure why that's not gaining traction, since if you want to involve the public, you already have the public out of here. Board members don't need to even be here.
Maybe your principle is, efficient use and
yeah, more efficiency.
My initial role is just to listen right now, but I wanted to make sure everybody had an opportunity to give their thoughts on principles, because we need to make sure our path forward is correct and following your guidance. Are there any folks that would like to add to the list of things that we've been talking about?
Just a quick comment. Back to President Gold's comment. The big cities, the large cities, voice is perfectly reflected in the weighted vote, because the weighted vote is based on population, so it has been already reflected. But just a general comment, I am concerned about AB 805, but I'm concerned about the general trend of Sacramento overreaching to local government. I think that's not the end of what we see right now, probably the beginning. And that's my position. Let the local government take care of the business, and I think that's my concern.
I just want to follow up, because I think I heard from that end of the table there, you know, the regionalism. And to me, that doesn't, it's like saying we're nationalism, or it doesn't mean a lot. I guess I would only like to say, you know, that more regional voice, or to have that in there, because I feel like now when I drive down here, I can make a difference. With the weighted vote, I don't make a difference. And so that's, I think, more, I want to make sure their voices are heard, or our voices are reflected and are part of discussion or conversation, but with the weighted vote, the structure of an 805, I don't feel like I have a voice, or I can make a difference of showing up.
I'll add 2 cents, and just because, not just because I'm a small city in San Diego, but representing North Coastal area and the small cities there. What everybody said about regionalism and keeping a regional voice, I think is very important, and choosing your leadership, that's paramount. The auditing issue is, I think, a worry about duplication and spending money. We want to be transparent. We want confidence, our community to have confidence in what we do, and I don't think anybody is worried about that, long as we're not, just wasting money and duplicating effort. But I would think the one thing that hasn't been mentioned so far is, and that I've learned in this particular position, is Sandag is far more effective going out to the federal government and the state government to raise funds for this region if we are a complete, cohesive voice and making recommendations on projects that reflect the entire region's priority list. And I'm afraid the leaders in Sacramento are trying to win a battle, but they're going to lose a war. They're going to possibly disrupt something that I think is working really, really well in getting money into this region to build transportation projects. And it may, in fact, end up by hurting us because we cannot go forward and present ourselves as a group, because I think it will disrupt our cooperation. I think it'll disrupt our debates on the relative priorities of projects, and I think it's going to be hurtful. So the principle of bringing us together and presenting one voice, I think, is important to be able to raise money for the region. So that would be my 2 cents.
So, having been appointed to the audit committee or oversight committee with Mayor Sano and Mayor Valls, we've been really clear about the idea of process. And so when I look at section 13, B3, which is on page 39, and it's about the auditor. And auditor shall have the power to appoint, employ, and remove assistants, employees, and personnel as deemed necessary for the efficient and effective administration of the affairs of the office, et cetera, and to prescribe their duties, scope of authority, and qualifications. I get concerned about that only because I think we need to also, one of the principles has to be framed. I'm not even sure if there's that is within any sort of government code. I manage a nonprofit, I run a nonprofit, so we have auditors, but we have an audit findings, and then you make recommendations, the board recognition. So there needs to be some frame about, make sure it's in the legal framework. Any audit needs to be within the legal framework, and good practices or good government practices, board oversight. And I'd be interesting to know if that actually exists anywhere else. Is there any type of audit committee or auditor with that type of power? Because it almost seems, it's like a quasi-independent employee management program. So that it seems to be out of place. But anyway, I think that's an important principle, if that makes sense. Yeah, I don't know how to frame that, but that's something it's been very clear with the staff and the auditor for Sandag that we really were, the message was to make sure that all the best practices are carried out here so that it's fair to the employees, but also to the public and to the agency. And that's something we've been really, really adamant about, and which I think has been great. And this seems to violate that sort of principle. So anyway.
Probably the most significant thing that's affected me in this way through developing authority, and you look at how people actually move around the community. Very few people stay in their own city, and even to that extent, when they do, they don't necessarily. We have this ideal that everybody should work right next to where they live, and in reality, it's like a fantasy. It's like very minute number of people. Most everybody is moving. I remember only the city of San Diego had a number of volunteers, so that. But even that, they were moving within the city large distances. I point this out because our population, where the housing is, and where the jobs are not the same. and they're unlikely to be. So, I mean, I don't know, what the future's gonna look like, but it's, what we've seen, that has the mobility of this area for all of us. I think we want to, the first and foremost, thing, we're talking about solving the homeless problem, and you start by doing two things: getting people jobs and getting them housing. And to me, to start to fracture us and to limit people's opportunities to be able to move about, I think it's really the wrong way to go. And I think implicit in this approach to problem solving, that's what we're going to run into now. There's no gate on Escondido to see if somebody's coming from San Diego to work in Escondido, but I guarantee you there are. There are people in Escondido going to San Diego, and there are people from National City who are migrating, I know for a fact, north of I-8, because that's where jobs are. And we lose sight of this sometimes in looking at these that really are artificial construct called cities. If you were starting with a clean slate, nobody would come up with 18 cities in this region. Okay? But that's our history, and we're stuck with that. But that should not preclude us from letting these parochial interests get in the way of understanding we're going to either make it as a region or, there's not going to be a real success story here if we don't have this mobility in terms of for a whole lot of reasons. The economy of this county is all one economy at the end of the day. None of your cities stand on their own, not even close to it. And that's what we need. We need something here that we think will become the most critical infrastructure components. That's what we're dealing with. And to be arguing over the things we're arguing, it just strikes me as not being visionary. Okay, it's not a good public policy. It may be fun politics, but it's not good public policy. And that's what at the heart of all this really concerns me.
Well said. Mr. Chairman, knowing that probably at the core of all the priorities you guys have laid out has been sort of starting out with the governance piece, and so kind of reflecting, I think, what we're hearing here, and first Cole's point is that, right now you have a system that requires both, right? It requires a tally and a weight for things to move. The new proposed system would really only have one system that overrides. It doesn't require both. It requires one or the other, depending on the override. Having said that, and coming back to Mayor Voss's suggestion, I think that look, if we're going down this road, then you need at least one vote from the sub-regions, and that could be either the 4 sub-regions or the 6 sub-regions, depending on how we look at this. The way San Diego's been organized for years now, that we got North Coastal, that are the 5 cities from Del Mar all the way to, that's one sub-region. We got North County Inland, it's Vista all the way to Poway. That's the second region. East County, Santee, Mesa, El Cajon, Lemon Grove, East County sub-region, and then South County being Chula Vista, National City, Coronado, and IB. And then we look at the city of San Diego as its sort of own sub-region, and then the unincorporated area of the county. Maybe the thing I was hoping to at least hear from you as we sort of figure out these principles. I think one of the arguments we hear is that 10 small cities can stop anything. And I don't know that factually that argument's wrong if you look at the numbers. But what's not always heard is the big cities can stop things too, right? So the big guys can equally stop. And the system you got today is designed and has worked, I think, to try to build consensus amongst big and little. But given that, are there any things that you would consider within the current system we have that would help address the issue of little guys stopping things with big guys moving stuff, in terms of recognizing that, look, this thing's making its way through the legislature, whether we like it or not, and it passed one house, it's in the second house, and we're going to have probably just a few opportunities to reflect some change or try to get some change in the Senate. And then after that, if it passes there, it goes to governor's desk. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to maybe hear a little bit about from you guys. Is there anything that you're willing to consider, or that you would suggest in terms of, look, if we got to make some change, you know, I think Mayor Voss has suggested one way of trying to strengthen the bill as it's written today, but are there other things that we should look at given your current system that you have today?
Yeah, we got to move quickly. If I could, you know, because you're talking about basically voting structure, you know, another possibility, and I know it's been brought up, but the idea of if you still have the bicameral system, so that you have the tally vote and the weighted vote at the same time, but that if the weighted vote went over a certain threshold, not 50%, but it would have to, you know, we have no problem with doing a supermajority to pass a tax and do all these other things. So put like a supermajority on it, and then it would overcome the tally vote. And still have the bicameral, but not just have a 50%. But if you went to like the 66.67%, that would be a very good protection. If you end up with the, what is it, the 12 small, or the 10 smallest cities, it's only like 12% of the vote. So that means if you take 10 cities, the 10 smallest cities out of there, you still have all the other jurisdictions that make up 88% of the vote. So why not have a, you know, if you have a supermajority on the weighted, so
I think
let it
we're
override.
suggesting different ways, and I think what we're trying to do is just give staff the benefit of this discussion so that any last minute changes that come up, they can maybe, you know, respond to those.
Exactly.
Rather than just saying, no, but maybe there's a way, you know, to resolve this in a more amicable way.
He's been waiting for this meeting.
It's okay. Chairman.
No,
Commissioners. I saw her hand first.
I just want, I like Steve's idea, and that seems like a good compromise. My main thing is that the city that I represent needs to have some kind of a say in what happens. And I think that if you think about it in the long term, if we ever want to pass another half-cent sales tax or bring more money in, how can I go to the citizens of my city and say, you should vote to tax yourself? We'll have no say in the matter, but you should go ahead and vote. I can't do that. I'm guessing that we'll never pass another sales tax, and we'll effectively neuter Sanday.
But not countywide, is what you're saying.
Yeah, into the future. And I think that I can't imagine that people see that as a positive change. So I realize that we're going to have to make some compromise. I think Mayor Voss's idea is a good one. I'd be willing to support that.
Well, I didn't want to get to that.
We're not talking
No,
specifics.
not talking the specifics.
I think it's, you know,
Philosophy.
to be honest with you, it's not something that I thought of, and I thought it was a good idea. I hate to say that in front of him, but
Because there's a first.
it starts to deal, we talked about a concept of regionalism, and he's talked about a way maybe to incorporate regionalism in a way that is different, but could, you know, I don't know how you ferret that out. But
So I guess what I'm saying is that if there was a compromise that could be made, that I think that in that direction, I think that
that's what I think.
I would be. I'm not dogmatic in the sense that it has to be the way it always has been. I'd be willing to.
That's what the discussion's all about.
I'd be willing to talk about compromises.
Okay.
Just in sitting here with having listened to everything for the past couple of months, it just seems fundamentally unfair and undemocratic. We've already taxed everybody, and now we're stripping their voice away. How can you do that? It's just fundamentally unfair. And it just doesn't go with the way that our state and federal government is structured. We have checks and balances. We've got a Congress and a Senate, and then it has to go through both houses. Same in our state. What you're doing is you're stripping away one house and saying you're only left with the legislature that has all the votes in like L.A. or whatever, and you're stripping away the Senate, where it just seems wrong, fundamentally unfair, and being able to call one person, being able to call a weighted vote and override the majority, it's unfair. Anyway, that's all.
Well,
Lori, your point, it's not just about being prospective, retrospectively, we've signed on to regional agreements on how we tax. And all of a sudden, we're gonna enter into something that does away with the decision-making over those funds, and in effect, as the mayor says, laid out of the voice and how it is, where the funds from Carlsbad, how they're being spent.
After they've been taxed.
So, okay, that's, is there anybody,
Yeah.
Mayor Salas?
So, I hate to weigh in on this discussion because 805 seems like it was written specifically for the city of Chula Vista, and I don't think that that was the intent of the author. But what I would encourage the board to do is to really take a positive type of approach in dealing with this bill and in trying to bring forward some of the really good recommendations that were made today. Mayor Voss, I really liked your thing about having the weighted vote based on the regional, the subgroups participating in it. But, I don't think that the author is unreasonable if there's a dialogue and that, that it's not like, it doesn't come to a confrontation type of thing. I heard Mayor Wells saying that he was willing to compromise. And I think that there's still an opportunity to have some influence on the way that this bill comes out, as long as, we can sit down and not take a combative approach, but be more rational in our discussion about it.
And that was the purpose of today, and I appreciate your comments. That's what I'm trying to give our people, without defining specifics, give them some flexibility to see if we can work out something. I'm not worried about change. I'm worried about the change is bad. But that's all. If we're going to do something, I'd like to see, if anything, the regional aspect strengthened rather than weakened. And I'm afraid we're going to get that now. I've just seen what it's done to us already. It's bothers me. Okay,
Real quick. Just, I don't want us to underestimate what Terry said earlier. Before, in the olden days, and it weren't that long ago, all the cities went out and sought their own funding, all the different organizations did, and we got very little money in because they were hearing so many different voices. And it was when we all came together and we set up criteria and we all went along with it and we all went as one voice, that all of a sudden we started getting a lot of resources into this area. We fractioned that up, and we are going to be going back the other way. This will not become aggressive. This will become very regressive. And so I really don't want us to underestimate what Terry was bringing out, because that is going to be extremely important, because I know in the past we've had, when we went through the criteria base and we've got down to actually appropriating the money, we've had council members saying, I want to change the criteria now because my district didn't get enough. Well, guess what? Under this system, they'd be able to do that. And that will tear us all to pieces.
Okay, I think first of all, I appreciate the discussion from all of you, and that's what we wanted. Having done that, I'm going to take the next item. I don't know if I can continue that to our next meeting on July 14th, because it's not time sensitive. And really, I'll let the staff ferret out. But we've got some good ideas, and it was a very good discussion. And with that, the next meeting is July 14th, and this meeting is adjourned.